I'm actually going to steal one of Sian's analogies, actually, about the lion and the crocodile, because that is really key to engaging all the different stakeholders. What I'm going to do is going to take you through the different stakeholders that you have to be aware of in terms of working with them, how to get them on board, and taking it forward in terms of a project for implementation as well. But it really is about finding that individual niche, finding what their lion is, but also providing them with evidence so that they can go back to their stakeholders with some kind of impact statement. Because we're already hearing today, what is the impact from the individual elements that we need to look at? So I'll look at the different stakeholders, look at the engagement process, and take that through to implementation. Just to give you a little bit of background, we started working with MyKnowledgeMaps in January 2013, and we went live for the whole of the diagnostic radiography programme in May of this year. So we've done a whole practice placement with the whole cohort, going out with their own individual mobile devices that we've provided for the students, and we're in the process of fully evaluating that placement. But as I go through the presentation as well, I will give you some examples in terms of where the impact and the positive outcomes have come across very, very quickly within that process. Please do stop me at any stage within the presentation. If there are any queries that you want to have answered straight away, then please feel free to stop me as well. So as with all course requirements, we have the validation process, and we took the opportunity for revalidation in April 2013 to really look at our assessment strategy for practice placements as well. So we did something slightly different to what's happened at Anglia Ruskin, and we really looked at what is it that we do need to assess. What is it that we are assessing and we're actually repeating the process over and over again? And what is it that we maybe are missing? What is it that we need to bring up to date to make sure that our workplace-based assessments are current, that they're current in the climate within the NHS Trust, but they're also current in terms of learning and teaching as well. So we looked at utilising the MyKnowledgeMaps and the Myprogress app as a learning and teaching tool for professional attributes for healthcare professionals as well as a competency-based framework. We're also starting to utilise it as an employability strand as well, so incorporating elements of personal development planning in there as well. And what we found is that students are actually engaging with this process. They're utilising the information and the work that they're undertaking whilst they're in practice placement, and really killing two birds with one stone. So they're utilising the reflective content and bringing it across for employability purposes as well. So when the students now go for interviews, their prospective employers can see that there is a journey of progress there, that our students can be developed. It's not just a case of getting that competency for a Band 5 radiographer's post as well. So we're utilising it slightly differently to how St George's Medical School utilises it as well. But ultimately, we had problems with our paper-based system, as I'm sure all of you have, and that didn't just include data protection issues, but it was about feedback. It was about the timeliness of the feedback, but also the honesty of the feedback as well. It was looking to make sure that the students weren't going to the same person for feedback. So with the reporting mechanisms that Sian showed you, you can look for patterns to see whether somebody is going to a particular person within the department for feedback, and that person might be very newly qualified. So it enables us to pick up on those pattern recognitions as well. But it was timely feedback that needed to be honest. More importantly, we're utilising the portfolio for the students to engage with reflection, really moulding them in terms of accountability, responsibility and professionalism, so they can actually own the content of that e-portfolio, but take it forwards to their next placement. Because what tended to happen with our paper-based systems, the feedback would be put into a folder, they would put it away, go into their academic block, and then come back and get the folder out again to go into their next placement. But actually, they wouldn't take what they'd learnt, they wouldn't take the constructive criticism that they'd gained from clinical block 1 into clinical block 2. Whereas here, it's with them all the time, so they can look back, if they've had a bad day, they can look at where they were on day 1 of clinical block 1, and they can now see where they've got to in the middle of clinical block 2. So it's a motivational factor for our students as well. We also took the opportunity to use the competency-based frameworks within the e-portfolio to actually map a lot of our assessments to the standards of proficiency from the HCPC as well. So there is a direct link in terms of terminology from the HCPC, which will be one of our main stakeholders, as with the NMC, so that they can actually see the pathway of our assessments. So now every student has to hit every standard of proficiency for each examination they undertake to be given 1 proficiency in that particular examination for radiography. So it's directly linked to the professional standards and legislation. The students can also map their progress, so they can see which elements they've completed and which ones are outstanding. So it means the student is responsible for that completion rate. We don't chase students. If they don't complete it within the time frame that's allocated to them, then they will receive feedback throughout the placement, but we won't chase them. And what it seems to do is engage them in ownership and the content of that portfolio for themselves. More importantly is this last one, in terms of early intervention. And that's really where the biggest impact has come from us. From going live in May with the system, it took me 2 days to pick up on a student that wasn't potentially understanding their assessments, that was not attending, or there were punctuality issues, but really they'd missed the concept of the assessment strategy as well. And within 2 days I could go straight in and give feedback to that student. Another example is one that we recently had a case where a student had to go down the monitoring pathway, which I'm sure we all have, and had received feedback via their e-portfolio from the department that we picked up on straight away. We met with the student, gave them objectives that they needed to complete within a timescale, and then last week we reviewed it. And actually, looking at the portfolio, it seemed as if they hadn't completed some of the elements. So it was very, very obvious that potentially that student would be going to student progress and monitoring. If they still didn't achieve those objectives, they potentially would be going to fitness to practice and potentially a termination of contract as well. Because we could go into the portfolio and pick up on the fact they hadn't completed it, when they came and met with us, it was very, very obvious that actually they hadn't had the privacy settings correctly applied within the app, and they'd actually been uploading things via their mobile phone. Once we'd got the privacy settings sorted out, and we were able to then see the assessments, it still time and date stamped that assessment when the student actually completed it, which was in the review timescale. If that had been a paper version, we wouldn't have known when that student had completed that information, and potentially that student would have been going down to the fitness to practice route, because we wouldn't have had the opportunity to pick up on that. In terms of funding, that already would be an £18,000 clawback from the local education and training boards in terms of attrition rates as well. So for the sake of a £150 device, which equals really £50 per student year, already we've got a saving of 1 student potentially through attrition. So I will go through and give you some other examples as we go through the presentation, but really it's quite early stages for us going live, but already within 48 hours we could pick up on things that potentially were going wrong that we couldn't for a paper-based version. I'd also just like to reiterate Sian's points in terms of having very broad shoulders and very thick skin. There is an element of persistence that's needed for whoever takes on board the projects, and in terms of taking ownership of the projects as well. It's a case of progressing with it, because you are confident that this will work. You are confident that you can see where this fits into the assessment strategies, you can see where this fits into the other stakeholders that will be looking at your monitoring processes as well. So there are barriers that you'll see throughout the day today, but it's overcoming those barriers and really being confident with the concept that you've actually got and worked towards. I undertook the development of the portfolio for the diagnostic programme single-handed, and it did take about a year to 18 months for me to get it to the point where we could go live, but that also incorporated a 3-month piloting system within all of our departments as well. What that says to me is that the system is very intuitive. I was given a week's protected time right at the beginning of the project and was able to put a lot of our assessment strategies into the content within 2 days. So we will look at the resources that you need to be aware of at the beginning of the project as well. So as I said, we utilise one of our drivers as our revalidation and our internal subject review and periodic review for the course. And we needed to make sure that our assessment strategy fitted the perception of our practice placement providers, but also our validation boards and also our monitoring processes. So as I said, it needed to be current, i.e. it needed to be current for the students as well, in terms of the learning and teaching tool that was utilised to get them engaged with the whole process as well. Feedback from the students is that they are proud to be part of a university that utilises the latest technology as well. It needed to be high quality, so we're now looking at quality of assessment rather than quantity of assessments, i.e. we're not looking at the number of times they do something, we're looking at the quality of mapping it to every single standard of proficiency for the HCPC, rather than doing an examination and being signed off for it as competent. It needed to be progressive, so it takes the student from being a dependent student to an independent practitioner, and that needed to be evidence-based. And that's the key really for all of the stakeholders. They want evidence to take back to their funding bodies, to their individual schools, to actually fund this project. We were lucky enough to be able to utilise some of our enhancement quality bonus from our local education and training board, from a green RAG rating, to actually fund individual devices being given to every student within the cohort. But ultimately, the system is student-centred. They take ownership of it. It's much more onerous on the student than it is on the tutor. We now don't have to go through paper-based documents. We don't have to store paper-based documents. We don't have to sit there and collate their attendance. The system incorporates all of that in there. But most importantly, it's live. The data that we're looking at is the current data that the students are actually achieving at. i.e. if the HCPC came in to visit, we could pick up any student from any cohort and know exactly what point in the course that they are at. Again, looking at student support and the early intervention, it saves the time in terms of providing documentation. And that goes across not just the academic staff, but the clerical staff, the professional support services staff as well, who have to create huge documentation for fitness to practice hearings, for disciplinary hearings. That information is already there for them to be able to collate. But more importantly, and the trend really going through the presentation, is the employability aspect as well, utilising the information that they are gaining whilst they're in practice placement. So it's not just about gaining their first job. The employer needs to know what the graduate's potential is. Are they somebody that can be developed within the team? Are they somebody that will be a Band 5 radiographer and then move on quite swiftly? So it's also for workforce planning as well. The student within the content of their portfolio needs to show that they can be adaptable, that they can be flexible, because that's what healthcare is all about. You can't have things in boxes. Things happen. They may get constructive criticism. They may get negative feedback on one day. And for a student, that can be quite detrimental to their confidence. But actually, you can guide them through that and get them to reflect on the process and bounce back from that negative criticism as well. And that shows that they are developing and they are adapting to the environment that they are actually working in. Once they've completed their portfolio within the 3 years, the content can then be taken postgraduate onto CPD or CPPD. as it's called now. So the evidence that they have throughout the 3 years can be utilised thereafter. So who are the stakeholders really? This isn't an exhaustive list by any means, but ultimately our informants are our local education and training boards. They are the people that hold the purse strings. Those are the ones that we have to provide evidence to in terms of QCPM, so Quality Contract Performance Management. By actually creating your assessments to link in with a lot of the CPIs, you are already creating that evidence there. So you can actually present the portfolio, and that will present evidence for a lot of the ticks in the boxes for quality contract performance management as well. Obviously, we also have our statutory body, the HCPC, and our professional body, the Society and College of Radiographers, that are there for validation purposes and monitoring purposes in terms of regulations. So those really are our informants. Just to give you another example in terms of the Let Bs actually picking up on the e-portfolio, in one of our other disciplines there was fraudulent activity in the previous cohort of students. That was really jumped on by the Let Bs, and it was put back to the university to say, how are you going to prevent this from happening? How are you going to monitor your students? Now we can obviously utilise the validation via email, as Sian pointed out previously, but also a lot of the other mechanisms within the portfolio that enable you to track your students as well. So really, these are the informants, but these engagers are the people that you really have to get on board. These are the people that you have to take with you, but you also have to be very clear to them that this is going to happen. There is no plan B, there is no paper-based backup system, and we've had an e-portfolio previously where we've run a paper-based system alongside it. And if you give them that choice, they will always go back to the paper system because that's what they know. You then end up with students doing a double whammy. They do it on the paper, they then do the same work when they upload it onto the portfolio as well. So we took away all of our paper-based documents. They're now not available on the virtual learning environment, they're not available in the departments either. So it's about saying, this is what's happening, this is what's been agreed at the higher level, this is what is best in terms of enhancing the student experience, but also the quality of the graduate that we are producing. So really starting off with the academic staff at the university, and I have to say they were probably one of the toughest stakeholders to get on board, and they're probably one of the last stakeholders that came on board as well. So we went ahead with the project, and it's only when they've seen the impact statement at the end that they've actually come on board and said, actually, would you give me some more training? Will you sit down with me and go through the system in a little bit more detail? But that's kind of only happened after the event. So the academic staff are the toughies. The e-learning unit at St George's really was my support mechanism when I developed the e-portfolio, in terms of their technology, their jargon, and also filtering any queries that I had. Practice placement providers were interested in how we would monitor our students, how we're going to make it easier for our placement providers to provide feedback that's much swifter and is much more accurate and honest as well. Our professional support services, i.e. our administration support, create all the accounts for us as well. They're the ones that will monitor students and disable accounts if a student's been suspended or they're taking an interruption of study as well. So they really need to be included at the administration level of the system. The student body, really when I said to them, this is the day you're going to have your training for the e-portfolio, and every single one of them in the auditorium, I think, rolled their eyes and said, I really do not need to be taught how to utilise a mobile device and how to use an electronic resource. So for us in the university, people thought it was going to be a lot more training and a lot more resource intensive from the student side of things than it actually was. And in terms of our supervisors and mentors, We didn't give them any training whatsoever, because it was seen that the tablet and the content of the portfolio was the students, and it was for the student to go out and actually educate the staff as well. They're used to giving feedback. It's in their job description. It's in every radiographer's job description to supervise and develop junior members of staff. It's not a choice that they have anymore. And it's about educating that workforce that this is a requirement and this is an expectation in terms of professionalism and accountability as well. So our local education and training board is obviously mapped to an education outcomes framework. So they want to look at what is the graduate that you're producing, what is the quality of that graduate, where are they going to be working geographically, and does the quality of your graduate meet their expectations as well. So again, it's going back to evidence-based. It's going back to the quality contract performance management, looking at what CPIs we actually achieve and which ones are still outstanding that we need to work towards. And what we found is that a lot of the elements within the system met those expectations as well. So you can kind of dampen down any worries, any queries at a very early stage, because if they do come back with a query, we know the answer. We know where the evidence is because it's very, very easy to locate. They're also interested in our standardisation processes. How do they know that a practice placement provider at one trust is going to be assessing the student and giving feedback at the same level within another trust as well? Previously, with a paper-based version, that was very, very difficult because it was very difficult to actually tailor a system for the supervisor to give you the information that you wanted. They could write whatever they wanted to. They could circle whatever they wanted to on paper-based systems. But within this, it gives you much more control in terms of standardisation. So that was another tick in the box in terms of the Let-Bs. We've already talked about quality of assessment rather than quantity. And one of the things that we developed within the portfolio was a set of core skills. So not only did we have the standards of proficiency, we broke those down into bite-sized chunks of assessment as well. So it was very transparent in terms of us providing evidence that our students could not only do an overall examination and understand the role of the radiographer, but each of those elements that constituted that would be evidenced as well. And again, looking at the monitoring, they want to know how we're going to prevent students potentially going to fitness to practice, because our role is to mould them. We've got 3 years to create a graduate that is professional, accountable and responsible, and is fit for purpose for employability prospects as well. So ultimately, they want a foundation that has excellent education rather than training. We're educating our student. We're getting them to actually take on board the roles and the responsibilities of a healthcare professional, as well as ticking the boxes to say they are competent to do the actual examinations that are set for them. And this directly relates to the NHS values and behaviours. So again, it's meeting the expectations of the local education and training boards. Those are the ones with the purse strings. Those are the teams that will claw back any funding if they feel that you're not utilising it appropriately. And ultimately as well, all universities will have a widening participation drive as well. So this also allows us to pick up on any attendance issues, any punctuality issues, any flexibility with working hours whilst the students are on placement. And that could be due to a multitude of elements. It could be childcare arrangements, it could be carer responsibilities, it could be misunderstanding of assessment content as well. So that provides support for those students that are actually coming through the widening participation pathway as well. And our HCPC requirements. So we mapped every examination that our student undertakes to the standards of proficiency. They self-evaluate. They know what they need to do. they can look at the progress mapping tool within the ePortfolio content, and it will tick off the ones that have been completed and very clearly show them what's yet to be completed as well. And ultimately what they're creating is a portfolio of evidence of their achievement. And that's how we sell it to the students. This is yours. This is your opportunity to show us that you are competent to be employed as a radiographer, i.e. you are safe. We are also safeguarding the public as well. We don't keep any assessments back from our students because we have to be quite creative with our placements to make sure that all of our students get the experience that they need throughout the 3 years. We upload and provide all of our assessments to our students on day 1. So if they achieve something that they may not necessarily achieve until year 2, then we give them credit for doing that previously or earlier on in the programme as well. So everything is achievable from the outset, and the student manages their own time. Are they going to do it when the opportunity arises in clinical block 1? Why not? If they've got the skills, the knowledge, the confidence to undertake that examination, then they can do it at the outset. But it's really about self-regulation and monitoring. So that goes back to the accountability aspect from the student. They're there to self-regulate. They know what's within the content of the portfolio, and they can work very closely with their tutor. But what we're finding is the quality of the content of the portfolio compared to the paper-based system is phenomenal. We're providing the students with formative elements within the portfolios where we ask them to respond to at least 3 of their feedbacks within any clinical block. They don't have to do that, but we're seeing students doing 3, 4, 5, and they're doing it on a weekly basis without us actually having to chase them up to say this would be a really good thing for you to do. So in terms of self-regulation and monitoring, they're using formative tools that aren't necessarily required for their assessment to actually monitor their own progress as well. So the academic staff, really, the beauty of this system was ensuring that they knew that it could be bespoke. So it could be tailored to what we needed it to do, but there were limits within the system. I.e., we thought for the therapeutic course, their competencies would be much easier to put straight into the MKM system than the diagnostic ones were. We couldn't have been more wrong. When we actually sat down and tried to put in the paper-based system onto a digital, it just didn't work. So we've actually decided to put back going live for the therapy course by about 3 to 4 months to make sure that it's right before it goes out to the students. We also looked at thematic analysis, and previously the diagnostic and the therapeutic course have been quite separate, but we actually do a lot of the same things. All of the healthcare disciplines do a lot of the same things in terms of patient care, gaining consent from our patients, and making sure that our patients are safeguarded. So what we're now looking at creating is thematic analysis across the whole school. So we're not both creating assessments that do the same things that are very different. What that means in terms of student support is that a therapeutic student can come to myself as a diagnostic lecturer and vice versa for support for clinical assessments and the e-portfolio. So again, in terms of resource, we're not having to go to discipline-specific lecturers. The e-learning unit, as I said, was really my best friend for the whole of the project and still is. And it's about the technical jargon, what the system can do, what the system can't do. And what they tended to do is have a single point of contact between MyKnowledgeMaps and the university to actually filter any queries through. Otherwise, you tended to get a lot of queries from lots of different disciplines in lots of different ways, actually about the same thing, that could have been answered by one of our e-developers within the university. They also looked at assessment design for us. We created the content of the e-portfolio, but we could go to them and say, I really need it to do this. It might not be able to do exactly what we want it to do, but they can look and see that there's a workaround. So ultimately, we're looking for the outcome in terms of content. And that outcome would be the same, but how you get to that outcome might be slightly different. They were also our institutional advocate. So in terms of going along to meetings, in terms of funding, in terms of getting our IT departments on side, they really were our advocates. They, again, could talk the technical jargon to the IT department to get clearance in terms of creating this platform for us to utilise. The IT departments were quite iffy in terms of security issues right at the beginning, which is why we had to go down to providing each individual student with a device. I think, again, as with Sian did, that will be relaxed quite a lot. But this was something new. This was a big change going from paper-based system onto a completely paperless system as well. So they were quite twitchy from an institutional point of view. But again, when I went to the departments and asked for the clinical governance and the information governance contacts, they weren't interested. There was no barrier there whatsoever because there was no patient information and we were not using their networks. So it was really more of the institutional IT system. But again, it's about education. It's about involving them and taking them with you on your journey. And ultimately, when it came to any training requirements or any support that was needed or representation, just hand-holding at any of our meetings, there was a lot more weighting behind the project because we had the e-learning unit there with us. So really it was about a marketing strategy as well. So really we thought there would be barriers with practice placement providers in terms of this is something different, this is something very, very new to us, and we do have placements that are very traditional that will not have utilised this technology before, even though as radiographers we're using computerised images all the time. So we work with 15 NHS trusts and we utilise those within our 3-month pilot at the beginning of the project as well. We have multiple assessors, so any HCPC registered radiographer with 6 months experience can supervise a student and provide feedback. So we don't have individual mentors that have had to complete assessment training as you do with the NMC. So we had a multitude of different people. So again, we insisted they utilise their NHS trust email so we could look for patterns within the data. What we did find, and again within the paper-based system, there was a variety of styles. A variety of styles in terms of supervision, a variety of styles in terms of the content of the feedback that was given. But within this system, there seemed to be more of an enhanced interest from our supervisors because they could see their name in lights. There was no getting away from who the supervisor was. And what that did is engage more of a discussion between the student and the supervisor as well. They now came to realise that yes, this was an expectation. That yes, this was part of their everyday role. And yes, when they confirm that they've done an examination on the information system within the department, they have a code for them to take accountability and responsibility for that part of their role. They now have that with this as well. It's not just a signature that we can't really tell who it is. It's stamped with their email address, the date, the time, when it was done, and how it was completed as well. And ultimately, the system needed to be patient-centred. So it has to have a patient-centred approach. All the assessments that we put into the system are about the patient in terms of their decision-making, in terms of their capacity, in terms of consent as well. So again, it's moulding the students to really realise what the role of the radiographer entitles. So our professional support services are behind the scenes. They're creating the accounts and they look at the application in terms of the organisation of the system as well. Where do you want the niches to be? Where do you want the different cohorts to be? Who do you want to be able to see what? We went with the situation of all the academic staff and all the placement providers being able to see every student's portfolio because they swap sites. So it also means that there's transparency in terms of information. They also can manage the reporting functionality. So if they are producing grids for exam boards, they can go directly into the system and export the data as an Excel spreadsheet that can go directly into our exam grids as well. And they manage the hardware resources. So we created a resources loan agreement that every student needed to sign to take responsibility for their own device as well. And if they lose it or damage it, then they will be required to reimburse the university for that cost. And so the professional support services manage that as well, the same way that they would do uniforms, etc. When we piloted our system for the 3 months, we utilised it as an opportunity to get the departments on board. So we actually used our alumni that have now graduated that are working in our departments to pilot the system for us. They know the paper-based system, they've been through our programme, they also work within the department, so they ended up being our core trainers. So we have people that have been included in the development of the content of the system, working in the departments where our students are going to be. So they know it in more depth than the other supervisors do. And then we created cascade training. So those are the people that they go to if they have any particular queries as well. For the undergraduates, this is their sole assessment resource. So there is no other choice in terms of completion of assessment as well. So they have to do it. And again, the broad shoulders come out and the thick skin comes out, because sometimes they don't like it. This is something new. This is something quite scary, but actually it's a lot of hand-holding that you have to do to actually make the project successful. As I said, always avoid a backup system, particularly a paper one, because that's the choice that will always be gone to. And we found that every student needed their own mobile device because they move around the hospital so much. For some other disciplines, we've talked about it within our faculty, and for some, in terms of education, they may not utilise an individual device. But for our students who are out on placement, they need their own device. So really going back to the education of our supervisors and mentors, it's their role, it's their responsibility, it's part of their job description. We have traditional departments, again, that in the past have been paid if they undertake student supervision or education, whereas that was taken away under Agenda for Change, and for some of those that didn't get paid previously, they found it quite difficult to actually come on board and say, this is everybody's responsibility. So we've provided courses, we've gone in twice a year and actually educated the staff as well, that they need to come on board, they need to join the party, because all of the stakeholders need to be involved for this to actually be successful. Because ultimately these graduates can be working with them within 2 to 3 years. So the role and responsibility of the supervisor has to be very transparent, and the expectation needs to be there within the department and the culture of the department as well. So really, what were the positive outcomes? Well, it really empowered partnerships within the institution. I know a lot of people within the faculty and their different roles and responsibilities having undertaken this project as well. So we've all worked together to make sure that this has become successful. So again, these are kind of your impact statements as well. Institutions like empowerment, they like sharing responsibilities, they like multidisciplinary teaching and cross-faculty teaching as well. Enhancing the employability for the NSS results this year that the students came out with for therapeutic radiography, we had 100% satisfaction rate. For diagnostic radiography, we had 95% satisfaction rate, because they have a platform and they can see where this fits in for them. But ultimately, coming back to the Let Be's, we have to safeguard the public. Linking directly back to the Francis report, a lot of the recommendations that came out of that report we've utilised as content in terms of the pathway for our assessments as well. We now meet professional standards much better. We've enhanced our students' experience so that when they come out as a graduate, They are now very aware of what the standards of proficiency are because they have to complete them every time they do an assessment. Our monitoring is much more accurate because it's based on live data, and our early intervention is much sooner than it was previously with the paper-based system that was dependent on the student actually handing it in on time. We have remote support as well. So we did have a previous e-portfolio system that was hosted within the university. Ultimately, when the university moved on to something else, they became very uninterested. So we ended up going back to a paper-based system. So actually having remote support via the MyKnowledgeMaps team as well makes it more of an enhancement in terms of impact for our stakeholders as well, because we're not dependent on that institutional vibe or culture. But ultimately, our feedback is much more timely. We're picking up on students much sooner, and the resource is in terms of money. And that's there, that's at the forefront within the NHS, especially within higher education at the moment. Just lastly, something to leave you with is the considerations that you need to take on board when you are trying to get stakeholders in with the project. It's the resources. Now, it took me 18 months to get it to a point where it could go live to the students, and I was adamant that we would not be putting a system out to the students until it was fit for purpose. So that was via a 3-month trial as well. You need to have protected time, really, rather than it being a 12 to 18-month project. 3 months protected time, including your pilot within that as well, rather than doing it with one person who's also doing a full-time academic role as well. The funding, there are various avenues, as Sian quite rightly pointed out, but obviously there is quality enhancement funding as well. So if you hit the top ratings, then the Let Bs release funding to the HEIs as well. But it's the development of appropriate materials. I created, quite simply, a lot of how-to guides, and we're actually going to video those as Blackboard collaboration snapshots as well. So within the resources element within our e-portfolio, there is a very short guide on how to do everything, how to complete an assessment, how to create an assessment, how to link up and sync your device to a Wi-Fi network. And every tutor that has an account and every student can access all of those resources as well. But really it's a time of change. We all know it's a time of change within the NHS and also within the higher education institutions as well. Money's at the forefront, so it's a softly approach. You chip away at it, but you have to be persistent that this isn't going away. And I have had to utilise that sometimes. This isn't going to go away. This is going forwards because this is going to make things better. And it's having that confidence and that self-belief that that's what's going to create a much better graduate in terms of quality and safeguarding as well. But most of the time is spent with reassurance, reinforcement, that those radiographers or supervisors or academic staff that aren't used to technology can actually sit down and they're off within 15, 20 minutes of doing their feedback. But be prepared to you have to make some executive decisions. That if people can't see where you're coming from, you bring them on board as much as you can, but we have had to make executive decisions. That are we going to go with this or aren't we? Yes, we are, because we've got the evidence base behind us to show that this is an enhancement. So just lastly, just make sure you know why you're introducing an e-portfolio. What is the need? Because if people can't see that there's a need, they're not going to take it on board and they're not going to take this forward. Make sure you do pilot before rolling it out or letting any student group have contact with the content of the system as well. Because if you lose the confidence at the beginning, it's very difficult to actually bring that back. Liaise carefully with those that do know. They know the technical jargon, they know what the flexibility of the system is, and they know what's possible because they've seen it all before. And you're very clear about what the assessment requirements are. So if your paper-based system fits a digital system, that's fantastic. But be very, very sure to make sure that that does happen. Make sure all the stakeholders are very clear about what's happening right at the beginning. Bring it to every meeting that you go to so that they can see that it's not just about practice placements, it's about employability. It's about utilising the devices when you're teaching, especially for images for us as well. So within the teaching sessions, within the academic blocks. And ensure the content is fit for purpose, i.e. all stakeholders are signed up to it. Every little niche within the project has come from each of the stakeholders as well. They only need one little thing to grab onto that they think, absolutely, that's going to make my life a lot easier, and that they're there with you. So just think about what your impact statement could look like, because the level of engagement and how successful your impact is going to be directly related to the level of engagement from the stakeholders as well. So kind of as Sian said, anything's possible and it's worth pursuing that project.